This is the My Child Will Thrive podcast, and I'm your host, Tara Hunkin, nutritional therapy practitioner, certified GAPS practitioner, restorative wellness practitioner, and mother. I'm thrilled to share with you the latest information, tips, resources, and tools to help you on the path to recovery for your child with ADHD, autism, sensory processing disorder, or learning disabilities. My own experiences with my daughter, combined with as much training as I can get my hands on, research I can dig into, and conferences I can attend, have helped me to develop systems and tools for parents like you who feel overwhelmed trying to help their children. So sit back as I share another great topic to help you on your journey. A quick disclaimer before we get started. My Child Will Thrive is not a substitute for working with a qualified healthcare practitioner. The information provided on this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat your child. Please consult your healthcare practitioner before implementing any information or treatments that you have learned about on this podcast. There are many gifted, passionate, and knowledgeable practitioners with hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of study and clinical experience available to help guide you. Part of our goal is to give you the knowledge and tools you need to effectively advocate for your child so that you don't blindly implement each new treatment that comes along. No one knows your child better than you. No one knows your child's history like you do or can better judge what is normal or abnormal for your child. The greatest success in recovery comes from the parent being informed and asking the right questions and making the best decisions for their child in coordination with a team of qualified practitioners in different areas of specialty. Now on with the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the My Child Will Thrive podcast. I am excited to introduce to you today Katie Kimball. Katie is the national voice of healthy kids cooking. She's a blogger, a former teacher, a mom of 4 kids who has founded the Kids Cook Real Food e-course, which is amazing, and her blog, Kitchen Stewardship, which helps families stay healthy without going crazy, which is we like. And she's on a mission to connect families around healthy food and teach every child in America and beyond to cook. So that's the great thing about the internet. You can even reach beyond that now. So Katie, welcome to the podcast. As I said, I'm really excited to have you here today because one of the biggest challenges we face as parents is getting our kids to enjoy eating healthy. Mm-hmm. So it's not just to get them to eat, but we want them to choose it for themselves as well. So
yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you started out? Why did you create Kitchen Stewardship in the first place, your blog?
Yeah, I mean, I was raised by a mom who cooked probably a little more from scratch than like the rest of the kids in my generation. And so I would have said like my mom's an amazing cook and she makes homemade bread and stuff like at Christmas. But there was still a ton of processed food, and like I had never cut a pepper or fresh garlic or anything like that in my life until I got pregnant for the first time. And, you just like realize that this little tiny life is depending on you for every single bite. And so that was like the very beginning of me sort of making a lot of little baby steps. And by the time baby number 2 was born, I had spent a lot of time in the kitchen, a lot of time at the cutting board, like thinking and processing. And I'm a former teacher. So it's just like, it comes really naturally to me to think about teaching other people everything I'm doing. And other moms around me were saying like, man, it's so hard. Like if I try to eat organic, it's too expensive. And if I try to like make things from scratch, I don't have time for that. And so I felt other people's tension, like pulling you in all these directions. Mm-hmm. And I would think as I'm chopping or preparing food in the kitchen, like, there really are some habits and techniques that you can do in the kitchen that like get everything. They're budget friendly. They don't take that much time, and they're really nutritious, and they're good for the environment. So those are the 4 pillars of kitchen stewardship, where we try to find those habits that kind of meet in the middle. And that's the not going crazy part. Like, how can you be healthy without completely losing your mind, your time, or your budget, and still take care of your family's nutrition and the environment? So that's where kitchen stewardship sort of grew out of, was me wanting to just teach other people, like, you can do this, give yourself grace, just take those baby steps instead of trying to change everything all at once, which is a pretty solid recipe for failure. And just watch yourself grow. And so we dig into research a lot and share simple recipes and techniques there.
That's amazing. It is amazing how many of us, even in our generation, didn't learn to cook.
Mhm.
And so it becomes, obviously, if you haven't even learned yourself, or only have some basic skills yourself, then to then try to pass that along, actually we're passing the wrong thing along to the next generation, which is, and a lot of that is driven out of the lack of time that people feel like they have to do these things. So, well, I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit too.
Yep.
But let's talk about strategies around, first of all, that you found to help kids eat healthier in general.
I like to flip this question on its head a little bit, because I think a lot of times when families struggle with healthy eating, we focus on the dinner table, we focus on the food we're eating them. And there are some really good strategies too for just kind of the how and why of eating at the dinner table. But I really think that it's even more effective and more powerful to rewind a little bit and forget the dinner table altogether and talk about what we do before dinner even hits the table.
Mm.
Are we getting the kids involved in the kitchen when, number one, there's no pressure to eat? That's huge, because kids feel that like, oh, mom and dad want me to eat, and it's this big, power struggle, and it's confusing and I don't like it. But when you're in the kitchen, that pressure's not there.
Mm.
And science also tells us that any exposure to food helps sort of fill that exposure bucket, right? And so especially for our very selective eaters, they might need 157 exposures to a food, let's say broccoli, before they're going to eat it. And that's a lot of little pieces of broccoli to put on your kid's plate, man. 157, like I'm tired just thinking about it. But if they shop for the food, wash the food, cut the food, serve the food, all those count. So you can like fill that exposure bucket much quicker with less pressure on the child. So that's the second reason. So less pressure to eat, filling that exposure bucket, and then feeling a sense of ownership,
Mm.
right? Like kids, when they're involved with making the food, there's a certain sense of like an open loop where they almost want to complete that loop by at least tasting it and experiencing, beginning to end the whole process. And the parents will say, well, I've had my kids try preparing food before and it didn't work. They did not eat that thing. And I'm like, well, it's not, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and it's not magic pixie dust. Like, you'll try, prepare the food and thou shall eat it. No, but it helps. It helps nudge them in the right direction. And like you said, we don't want kids to just eat the food as if it's a prescription. We want them to take ownership, to believe that it's, both good for them and fun for them. So that when they're out of our houses, whether that's, when they're in middle school or high school, they're out of our homes a lot more. Or when they're adults on their own, we want them to be able to actually both have the capacity and the skills and the desire to cook and eat healthy food for themselves.
Yeah, no, it is a really big one. I mean, I hear often, well, my kids are at the age where they're young, they're teenagers, and they get more and more freedom and ability to go select what they're eating now,
Yep.
because it's not as constrained by the four walls of our home, or what I make sure that goes in their lunch. In the past, they now pack their own lunch. But even then, when they get outside or they go to friends' house, which happens more and more, you have to make sure they're making great choices. And the only way I can think of that will really works long term is to educate them on why they need to be eating well, and showing them, like you said, through exposure in the kitchen, which I think is a really great way of looking at it. The more they see that and appreciate that, I think they really do start to, it ingrains in them something, as opposed to just because I told you so. Doesn't work
Yeah.
long term.
Yeah. And even if a child believes that healthy food's important, if they don't know how to cut an onion, or they don't know how to take meat out of a package and get it from raw to edible, like they're still going to probably fall back on convenience foods or spend a lot of money on like expensive pre-prepared kind of whole foods ish stuff,
Yeah,
so
true.
you've got to build those skills or they're going to flounder.
Yeah. So why I touched on it a little bit, but why do you think that most parents aren't teaching their kids to cook?
Yeah, it's hard, like no bones about it. First of all, because many of us maybe weren't taught to cook as kids. And that's the story I started hearing from my community at Kitchen Stewardship. Like, man, I really do want to be healthy, but I was never even taught to cook. Like, I don't have the foundation. And I could see it happening in my own house too, where like I was not necessarily teaching my kids to cook, and here I was teaching people like all around the world to cook, and I was a teacher. I have a teaching degree. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the most important people in my life. So that's why I started Kids Cook Real Food, just because I know, A, like if we don't have the skills, we're not passing them on. And B, I think a lot of parents say like, man, kids are too messy. Kids are too slow. Like I need to get dinner on the table stat. There's no way I can slow down. A lot of kids, by the time we're kind of interested in teaching them when they're 8 and 9 years old, they're not very motivated anymore. They're like, oh man. And you're thinking, oh, yeah. Like I've had to do, make your bed, get dressed, brush your teeth, do your homework, amount of energy for come cook dinner with me. You know what I mean? So there's no doubt about it that it's just difficult. And so my mission here is to figure out like, how do we motivate each other? How do we motivate parents in general to be like, oh my gosh, this is as important as homework and brushing your teeth, and maybe more important than making your bed.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I mean, what's going to happen if the bed's not made, right?
Right.
Yeah. What's going to happen? Well, and I think what's really interesting about that too, when you talk about even making the bed, is that if they're not preparing or cooking a proper breakfast for themselves or work with you in the morning, that we do tend to lean on convenience foods then, because that's usually the busiest time in terms of getting people out in the morning. So it is about choosing what we're spending our time with in the mornings in particular, and not worrying about the bed so much, and maybe worrying a little bit more about what's going on in the kitchen. And I'm just as guilty for that in the past as well. Now I let the beds go unmade. It makes me twitch a little bit, but the world still revolves, so we can do that. So what do you find are strategies that you think are the best for helping your kids take charge of their own health, and really the whole family?
Yeah. So just to like let people understand, my kids are 5, 8, 11, and 14 right now. Mm-hmm. So I will know for sure in like 6 or 7 years if this actually works, because I only, I don't have any children out of the house, but so far so good. My 14 and 11-year-old are fairly nutritious eaters when they're out of the house, and they get on the soapbox with me too. I think to put it very simply, it's a gradual release of power. Mm-hmm. Right? So when you have toddlers, babies, you're in charge of every stinking morsel that goes in their mouth until they pick up, the pebble from the ground. And we still try to be in charge, right? So, but the older the children get, the more opportunity, like you said, the more opportunity they'll have to eat other things. And therefore, the more control they need. So we have to figure out how to like slowly, gradually build choice and agency into their day, as well as education. So I'm a big proponent of being science geeks and talking about food at the table, talking about why we eat certain things or why maybe we don't eat certain things. I think it's really, really important to build mindfulness in our kids, and that's about eating. And that's something that I've like never, ever, ever was taught as a kid to think about, like, if you eat X, how do you feel? If you eat Y, how do you feel? And some things maybe give you energy, something feel sluggish, some things make you lose emotional control. And, there are foods that shouldn't be in your diet if that happens. And so I think it's really important for that not to be like coming down from above, thou shalt not eat this, but let's talk about this. Like, here's why, mom and dad have noticed that this food, maybe it's gluten or dairy, those are our big culprits, right? This food doesn't make you feel good. And probably at a certain point outside of celiac, I would almost encourage parents to allow their child to eat the food that doesn't make them feel good, and then say, just listen to your body. I really want you to pay attention, so we need to form that connection between the brain, what the food we're eating, and our body's reaction, so that kids can notice that. And then I use a phrase all the time. I say, listen to your body. It's good to listen to your body, and know when you're full, know what makes you feel, good, know when you should stop eating, know when you're hungry, all those things. So that's really important, is just helping the children at any age to connect the food with their bodies, and then building in choice. So for example, in our house with desserts, we allow 1 dessert a day. And we just switched this up about a year ago, that we allow the kids to eat the dessert at any time they want. It doesn't have to be after you eat a good meal. Because I did a great interview with a feeding expert who said, you know, if we always have dessert as the prize at the end of the race, you know, you must eat your vegetables and then you get dessert. We're teaching them that treats are only for celebrating, and that broccoli is a, you know, thing to get through. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's a good point. It is a
good
point.
It's really hard. It's still hard in my mind. Like my 5-year-old, the others, you know, have had like already ingrained their habits of like dessert goes after a meal. The 5-year-old was like, sweet. When we changed this, he was 4. He's like, he had dessert for breakfast for like 2 months. It was super bizarre. But then he would regret it sometimes if we would have ice cream as a family, or if we would have, you know, something fun as a family later in the day, and then he couldn't participate. So, you know, and so that hurt a little bit, but we had to be consistent. And that was part of him learning like how to make his own choices. Right. And so whether it's with treats or not, you can build some element of choice into what your kids are doing. And, you know, obviously teach them balance. And so a kindergartner is probably going to have fewer choices than, say, a 6th grader. By the time my kids are in middle school, when it comes to, let's say, treats or desserts, I usually say, you know, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you to make your own decisions, right? Because again, I have a high school freshman, and when he was in like serious middle school, 7th and 8th grade, I knew that he could be sneaking candy from his friends, or like he could be eating whatever he wanted all day long, and I would never know. And so for me to have that one treat on him is just like, I'm going to lose, you know? So I sat down and had a conversation with him, and I said, listen, like, you need to know your body. You need to know what you can handle, and our bodies can filter some junk, but not too much. So, you know, you make your own decisions. And the only like rule that I'll never lift is just don't lie to mom about food.
Yeah.
You know, if I ask you, did you eat such and such, or are these candy wrappers in the garbage yours? Like, just don't lie to me. As long as we have open communication, you know, I have to, and sometimes that means they fail. Sometimes that means they eat something they shouldn't, but it's better for them to fail. So, and in my house, we can talk about it than like be the college student who's eating like bowls of Skittles for breakfast, you know, because he never had Skittles in his life or whatever it may be. So there's this gradual release of control with teaching mindfulness and educating about how food fuels our bodies. I hope that's the secret sauce. I hope that's the recipe for success. Like I said, I won't know exactly, but most of the time my older 2 kids make pretty good choices. The girl more than the boy, but
yeah. Well, I mean, and like you said, and we've talked about this already too, is that at some point they are going to have to make their own choices. So we do have to just educate them as best we can. I do love the rule that you have around just saying, you know, like it's like a lot of things that we want our kids to be able to talk to us about, that there's no consequences other than the consequences, obviously, to your health. If you've at a certain age, if you've gone outside the boundaries of what we've agreed upon, so that you keep that open communication, because it is really important. I find, especially in my household too, because I have one child that's, you know, much more compliant than the other one, now that she has latitude. And if you don't know when something's going wrong, and we're asking them to listen to their bodies, and what they're wondering why they're having challenges of a certain one kind or another, if we can't have an open conversation about, well, could it be the food that you've been exposed to in the recent past? And if you can't have that conversation open and honestly, you're not going to be able to figure out what might be causing the problem, and you can just spin your wheels a lot. And for them, it's really frustrating too. So it does, I love what you're doing in terms of fostering that open communication, and the consequences, like I said, are only the consequences to their own health and from their own choices. So I think that it is very, very important to do that. One thing you often say is that cooking is so much more than just kitchen work. So how do you think that learning to cook can impact kids in other ways?
Yeah, it's so easy to look at the kitchen like it's just connected to food. Right? Okay, fine, Katie, I will teach my kids to cook so that they eat healthier and can sustain themselves as adults. Fine, whatever. But I feel like that would be like saying reading only belongs in reading class. Like, oh, you'll never use reading outside of reading class. Well, wait a minute. No, like actually reading applies to like literally everything that you do and could ever learn. And I feel like a lot of the personality traits and qualities that we want to raise up in our kids can really happen in the kitchen. Meaning that when you're working together with your kids, that's when they're going to get your sense of sense of humor, your sense of being a good friend, your sense of being open and sharing with each other. And so it's this amazing opportunity to connect as family members because you're working together for a common goal, right? There's nothing that brings people together more than that effort and that working for a common goal. I think, it's important to many people to build generosity in kids, to build kids who are willing to serve others. And again, like, you don't have to tell a child that they've done a good job when you create an opportunity for them to serve others food, sustenance, something that people need to survive 3 times a day. And that also I see as this huge opportunity for self-esteem and confidence. We've worked so hard in the last couple of decades to build self-esteem. And I use air quotes on that only because I think our efforts are well-intentioned but errant. Because we've built self-esteem by like sticking their papers to the fridge and saying good job about everything and giving participation trophies and medals. And we've gone so far, like we've pushed it so far to just thinking that everything a child does is amazing, that the children know that nothing we say matters, right? When we tell them how amazing they are. So they need to feel that experience of being able to do something, right? To serve someone food, to nourish someone else's body, or to nourish their own body and fulfill that basic need. Like, no one has to say good job, right? So there's this amazing sense of self-esteem and confidence. And I see that confidence, like in our own family, it spills out into other areas of life. It's not just in the kitchen, it's not just food, but when you know that you're, especially for younger children, or like middle-sized kids, I guess, when you know that you're doing stuff like cooking a whole meal for your family that most of the other kids in your class aren't doing, you feel like hot stuff. and like my daughter last year in 5th grade, she's very, very reserved, very quiet. She ran for class officer. And I thought, this is very surprising, but she wrote her little speech and it talked about babysitting her little brothers and making dinner for her family. And I'm like, that's exactly what I hoped would happen, but it was still like a really nice surprise. And then the last thing is creativity. We live in this digital age where we're not doing enough with our hands and we're not doing enough that's like really creative work. And so the kitchen is both. You're literally working with your hands. We don't do a lot of woodworking and sewing as much anymore. So it's important for kids to be able to create things with their hands, but also infuse the actual like creativity, like, oh, here's what the recipe says. What if I tweak this ingredient? Now they're taking, again, some ownership and infusing that creativity. So I just see the kitchen as sort of the epicenter that can overflow good qualities like connection, confidence, and creativity onto all areas of life. It's not just about food.
Yeah. Well, and it is amazing all the different things that you can cover off just in one experience. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about the things that a lot of the parents that are listening to this will find too with their kids, is that it's almost, I always like to find things we can do with our kids that are therapy. And I say that in air quotes as well, but aren't therapy. So it's very therapeutic in terms of working on their fine motor skills when we're doing lots of chopping. And I know that it will alarm parents, but Katie does a fabulous job of teaching kids knife skills, which, most adults don't have. I watch other adults chop things and I'm just like waiting to call the ambulance. So I find that frightening, but so learning to do that, but also the textures and learning, that sensory input for kids is incredibly important. The smells, the tastes, and then also, obviously the creativity of seeing how, in baking, it's like chemistry and the science of that, as well as in cooking, the artistry, really, because you can create all different types of things. So, it is amazing how sometimes we turn what would be a chore to a lot of people, you can just turn it into a whole different type of experience for the kids.
And it's fun. And that's kind of my best tip for parents is if you're feeling that stress and like that time pressure we talked about, kids are always asking to help right before dinner. And you're like, dude, I literally have 17 15 minutes. And if I do not get this dinner on the table, somebody's missing an event, right? Soccer or whatever. And so I say make it an event, make cooking the event, do it after school when the kids have had their snack, do it Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, like sometime where you have like the balloon of time available to you, and then it won't be stressful. Then it can be fun and you can explore. And the bonus for parents is that once you've invested a little bit of time making cooking a family experience and an event, the kids are building their skills. And then when they ask to help, you're like, oh, you actually have the skills to help. Come on in. And they speed up dinner preparation. So don't teach new skills before dinner. Teach new skills outside. And then those skills become not so new and they can be helpful.
That actually, you answered a question that was going on in my mind, which is that one of the reasons we often don't, kids are always asking to help in the kitchen. And that's exactly the reason we always push them away. We're like, nope, we got to get this done fast. So, and they are messy when they learn to cook in the beginning. Do you have any quick tips around the mess and the management of the mess when you first have the kids enter the kitchen?
I wish. My kids are still really messy cooking, but I am too. Like if I'm cooking up a storm, I leave the kitchen and I'm like, oh, good Lord, I hope there's a fairy somewhere to do my dishes, you know? So it definitely, I feel like it's like your own, if you're a parent who cleans up well as you go, you can easily impart those skills to your children. If you're not, then it's all about just psychologically getting over yourself and getting out of your way, right? Like we just have to convince ourselves like, this is worth it. The mess is temporary. I can deal with it. I can teach them to clean up, you know, and press forward in spite of messiness.
Yeah, exactly. Baby steps.
Yep.
For sure. So in terms of, do you have some tips to supercharge dinner time and making use of those, you know, you talk about those time pressures around dinner. It seems to be the biggest one, breakfast, I'd say, and dinner. But what's some of the tips you have to help us make use of that time properly?
Yeah, you know, and I'm going to just pull this back away from food again, because I think if you can make time for family dinners, they are so powerful. And so you might as well supercharge every moment. And so just a couple like really quick tips that don't take any time. One is to do some deep breaths before dinner with your kids. And I'm so glad I do interviews because I always get out of that habit. So I'm like, okay, tonight we got to do this again. And as you know, that's very important for digestion.
Mm-hmm.
And it only takes like 30 seconds. So why not like teach our kids that really good habit of breathing in, like a 4-6 breath is great, in for 4 counts and out for 6. And then giving some form of gratitude, right? Like prayerful families can make sure that their prayer is part of it. But otherwise, like brain science says that if you're actually feeling gratitude in your body, you're getting yourself into more of a parasympathetic state, which is great for digestion. And I like to have little prompts at dinner time too. So we've been doing one the past year we call the 3 L's. So conversation wise, you say, when did you laugh today? What did you learn? And how did you love someone else?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. And it's a little different than just like, how was school? What did you do today? You know, it's really, and you know, laughter is so good for a family to share together. So half the time if someone says, you know, when did you laugh? You say, well, what did you laugh about? Then they say it and everyone's laughing. And so it's just a way to like bring the family together and have kind of that platform. Plus I think when, I've heard some of my kids say like, ooh, that'll be my learn for dinner. So they're thinking about their own learning, metaphysical, which is really good. And then they're thinking about their own service too. Like, oh, I might be asked, like, how did I love someone today? I better open a door for somebody. And eventually, you know, that's the habits I want to build in my kids, that they're generous and giving to others.
That's amazing. I love all those things. And you're right, because as we just ask those questions, how was school? It's usually, or what did you do at school? For most kids and most parents get the response, nothing, which is really isn't confidence instilling.
And I'll tease them. If they say nothing to what did you learn, I'll be like, my goodness, I need to call your principal. Your teacher should be fired. You know, they had you for 6 hours. And I mean, I make sure that I'm smiling, obviously, but like, you learned nothing the whole day. So, and we make adults answer that too, because learning's not all academics, right? Like if you didn't learn anything academically, you better think of some life lesson.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Sadly, I think I get one every day. So it's opportunities to improve, right? On a daily basis.
Right. Exactly.
So before we wrap up, I really would love for you to tell parents about your Kids Cook Real Food e-course, because I think it's such a great way, especially for the parents that are out there that don't feel that they're great at cooking, or they don't really know or understand how to cook or use a knife, like I was just talking about, those adults that I know that are out there chopping things both inefficiently and very dangerously. So I'd love for you to tell everybody about what the course is all about, and how you've created it to really serve kids.
Yeah, my mission's to like make a roadmap for busy moms, busy families who just don't really know where to start. So as a teacher myself, I thought about what's developmentally appropriate for different ages, and how can we like sort of build one skill on a next, so that the skills you learn earlier loop back in. So like all the thinking is done for you. That's my promise. Like you don't have to think, which is an amazing gift for a parent, right?
Yeah.
You do not have to think.
Yeah.
And I set that up into 3 levels. Yeah. So we've got our preschoolers and sort of our early elementary, like once they can read, and then our advanced kids, our ages 8 and up. And with our preschoolers, we do a lot of that fine motor skill work. That's the same academic skills they need in preschool to hold a pencil and to cut and all that stuff. And the goal with our little ones is just to really have a positive experience, and to connect with the parents, and to give parents a way to be able to say yes. You know, your 3-year-old says, "Can I help?" And it's so easy to say, "No, not right now. This is mommy's space." And so I want it to be much easier for you to say, "Yes, you've learned your measuring skills, and mommy needs, Italian seasoning and salt and pepper for this meal." Like, it doesn't have to be fancy, right? You set your preschooler up at the table with those ingredients, and help them find the spoon. Like, we have special ways for little kids to rename the spoons, so that they don't have to read, they don't have to know numbers. And it'll take your 3-year-old 10 minutes to correctly measure the salt, the pepper, and the Italian seasoning, but you're still in the kitchen doing your work. So that's kind of the magic of what we do, is we empower kids to be able to do even small jobs on their own at really young ages. We do get the sharp knives in the hands of our intermediate kids. So starting about 6 or 7 years old, we're using a sharp knife, but it's the right size of the knife for the size of the child and the right food. That's an equation that you can't really mess with. You don't do a big apple with a paring knife. You know what I mean? It's just things that, like, again, I've done the thinking for you. Parents don't have to. And we get those early readers also to the stove, and their goal is really to be able to follow the whole recipe completely by themselves. So the confidence is just exploding at that age. It's the age they're learning to read and write very proficiently. Like, if you have a child who's past 3rd grade, like, they're reading and writing from 1st through 3rd grade, immense increase, right? In what they can do. Same can happen in the kitchen. We can raise that bar and expect a lot out of them. And then once they understand the stove, following recipe well, and the sharp knives, we up the ante to the chef's knife, and balancing multiple dishes in a recipe, and really being able to make the whole meal by the time kids graduate. That's the goal, is that kids who graduate our course can make any recipe they come across with confidence. And 8 of the 32 videos are knife skills, because that's so important. If you're eating whole foods, you have to be able to cut them up, or pay someone else to cut them for you. It's an expense, it's a trade-off, and it's really allergy friendly. I know you have a lot of gluten and dairy free people and listeners out there, so I come from a place of understanding these allergies are really a part of our lives now, and I want all kids to be able to access cooking. So it's safe even for celiacs, because it's your kitchen.
Yeah.
Right? It's your food. And so we use a couple, like dairy and gluten, a couple times, but there's always adaptations and substitutions. So my goal is to teach the skill. So if the skill is rolling dough, well, we might demonstrate with whole wheat dough, but then we have a number of recipes that are gluten-free or grain-free. You still get the same skill, your family's favorite recipe, right? So it's very flexible and adaptable like that.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's brilliant about it, is because we do have so many of these kids, our kids have a number of different allergies or intolerances that or sensitivities we're trying to avoid, which means that they can't always get their favorite foods in a store setting, even if you could get them in a whole food type setting. So learning to cook empowers them to continue to eat the way that they need to eat to be healthy, beyond their mother's kitchen. So, or their father, depending on who's doing the cooking. Cause I know families where it's mostly the dad. So
Yes.
I don't want to jump the gun on that one, but, it is an incredible skill to give them. Actually, it's a real gift to give to them, to be able to do this. And like you said, how proud they are when they do it, is pretty amazing. I know my younger daughter rolled out of bed extra early this morning because she really wanted to have pancakes on a weekday, which would not normally happen, but she rolled out of bed to make her grain-free, gluten-free pancakes, dairy-free, the whole free.
Yes.
But she got
invisible, as my mother-in-law would say.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing left.
There's nothing left. But she really desperately wanted pancakes this morning, so that's what she did. So they, made them for her sister, and cleaned up, and off they went to school. So it once they do know how to cook, they really do start to take more charge. I probably should let them in the kitchen more often, but I have that mess issue that I still have to work on my own. That's a me thing. They don't mind the mess at all.
No, they don't. It's tough. But I mean, I love that story. So she was empowered to take care of herself. She was generous in serving her sister. That's so beautiful. And sticking with the allergies. Yeah, my daughter's been dairy-free for about a year, and it's been really tough. And I'm not sure if we would have survived it if she didn't have the capacity and the ability to come home sometimes and say, I'm so tired of apples and peanut butter. I'm so tired of these same old snacks, and to find a recipe on Pinterest and make it.
Yeah.
For herself, dairy-free. And it's been great that she can do that.
Yeah, no, it makes a huge difference. And like you said, it's amazing now. There's so many recipes out there. Mm-hmm. So the food, or the ability to eat these foods, is out there for free on the internet. There are also some fabulous cookbooks, which I'm a collector of. But because it's just so much fun to pull them off the shelves and flip through them, and actually, and it's funny, I should have brought one of the ones that my daughter, she tags all the recipes she wants to make in it. So it's it is great to have that, and so all that's there and ready for the taking, if they can just learn some of these skills to get it done in the kitchen themselves when they feel like it. So when we don't have time to do it for them, they can do it for themselves. So I think that is amazing. That's why I was so happy to have you here with us today to talk to people, because I know what a great job you do this, and to take the thinking out of it for parents is enormous. Because the last thing any of us need in our lives is something else to figure out that's not it's not our thing. And it makes it so great that you have this system, and for kids to successfully go through and, as you say, graduate the course and become proficient in the kitchen. By what age? What age do you think that they can graduate from that program typically?
So my kids about between 8 and 10 have done the chef's knife skills. Yeah. And I get to see kids' pictures. I get to see member families sharing pictures in our Facebook group. And I've seen kids as young as even 7 and 8 tackling a whole meal. I love the Instant Pot and the slow cooker, because there's a little less of fear of fire. Yeah. And plus we actually have a whole mini course called the Thematic Skill Lab about how to use the Instant Pot and slow cooker, even if you don't have your knife skills, because you can use dried onion and dried garlic and still generally compile all those recipes and make the entire dinner at age 6 or 7. It's incredible.
That is amazing, because the Instant Pot is a staple in our kitchen. I have a great chef's stove and oven and everything else, but the thing that gets used the most right now is the Instant Pot. It's like a piece of heaven, that thing.
Yeah, I did a cool interview with a 7-year-old from Canada who was so proud of himself. He made his dad Instant Pot lasagna for his birthday.
Wow.
Completely by himself. I'm he was just so cute.
That's adorable. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing this. Where can people find, obviously, your blog as well as the course?
Sure. So kidscookrealfood.com is the course. And if enrollment's closed, there's always something free to help move you along. So I'm always there to support parents. And kitchenstewardship.com is the blog. And that's where like the families can dig into, the adults dig into recipes and research and all that stuff. And we're on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Wonderful. And I'll make sure that I put links to everything below too, if you're looking at this on your phone or on your computer at home, so that you can get there very quickly. Thanks again, Katie, for joining me today. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Awesome.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining me this week on the My Child Will Thrive podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by the My Child Essentials membership box, a quarterly subscription box curated by me to give you the tools you need to help your child thrive too. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and if you can spare a moment to give us a review, we'd love the feedback. Thanks for joining me today. This is Tara Hunkin, and I'll catch you on the next podcast or over at mychildwillthrive.com.